Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Freddie O'Connell. Freddie is the 10th mayor of Nashville, Tennessee. We wanted to had the opportunity to sit down at the mayor's office and talk about human flourishing in a communal context. So often in the field of ethics in the Western world, when we talk about flourishing, this is construed as an individualistic pursuit. What does it mean for me to flourish as an individual? What does it mean for you to flourish as an individual? But obviously, as many people have said through many centuries, we human beings are social creatures. We're social animals. And it doesn't make sense to talk about flourishing unless we also talk about communal flourishing. How do we flourish together? What does it mean to have a sort of common life together that makes possible flourishing even as individuals? And so we thought, well, who better to talk to about this question than a mayor of a significant city in our country, our own kind of hometown here in No Small Endeavor of Nashville. So a delightful time sitting down with the mayor. He brings a particularly fascinating set of considerations from his training. In college, he was schooled both in the humanities and the sciences, which brings a set of considerations perhaps unique that it seems to me quite helpful for pursuit of civic leadership. And I would say last, one of the things that's always impressed me about Freddie O'Connell here in Nashville is the rumors about him in which he simply is a human being who shows up for his neighbors, that when there's something that needs to be done in the neighborhood, he's so often there and he simply shows up, does the work, does what's needed, and does it with a good spirit, caring for his neighbor. So we were very grateful to get to sit down with Mayor O'Connell. Enjoy. Here's Mayor Freddie O'Connell. Today we're joined by Freddie O'Connell, Nashville's 10th mayor and a lifelong Nashvilleian whose path to public service has been shaped by deep civic roots, a career in tech, and nearly a decade representing the 19th District on the Metro Council. He's a graduate of Brown University with degrees in both music and computer science. He's also spent a fair amount of time behind a microphone, co-hosting a political talk radio show years ago, and is known to show up and still do a bit of DJing around town at special events. Welcome, Mayor O'Connell.
Lee, good to be with you.
Good to be with you. Thanks so much for having us downtown.
Yeah, I guess I don't even know. Do y'all typically go on site or?
It varies. If we can do it in Nashville, we try to do it on site, and then we travel out to various places on occasion. So
well, there you go. Welcome to City Hall.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would love to talk a little bit about your family heritage, and I didn't know this until doing some research. But you have this fascinating Lithuanian, Polish, Jewish heritage, and then Irish Catholic heritage.
Yeah.
So let's begin with the Lithuanian, Polish, Jewish heritage. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I guess it's a fascinating story where my maternal great-grandfather was an Orthodox rabbi in Poland. And so somehow, and this is a story I probably need to dig into more with my mom and her sister, the siblings, in fact, all but her father, I think had some sense that trouble was brewing in Europe. And
this is like 1930s.
Yeah. Into the 40s even, I think. I'd have to go back and look and see what year my grandfather came over. But, it's interesting. So he was Polish, had wanted to play professional soccer in Europe. And I think that's one of the reasons he was actually reluctant to leave. Mm-hmm. And again, another piece of the puzzle that is a little unclear to me. His two brothers had started a textiles company in New York, and he did not want to go to New York. For some reason, he said, I will go manage a factory in Dixon, Tennessee. And that is where he met my maternal grandmother, whose family was Lithuanian. And she had come down from Pennsylvania, I think, because we were seeing a little bit of depression recovery occur in the factory capacity in the South. And so the Dixon part of my story starts there. And that's where my mom and her sister grew up. And then my mom goes off to Washington University in St. Louis, in the late 60s, early 70s, meets my dad, who's from an Irish Catholic family that started out in Chicago. But, they eventually, he and the brothers closest to him, and so his one sister grew up in Clinton, Maryland for most of their upbringing. And so by the time we were born, my brother and I, we'd go up to the Clinton house and my paternal grandfather had been a nuclear researcher. And it's such an interesting thing to think about because my understanding is he got there without a college degree. But then by the time of his death from cancer, the government actually paid out a settlement to my grandmother because it was pretty clearly a case of exposure to radiation at a time when the understanding of the need to protect yourself against that would not have protected him. And so he died when I think I was about 6 years old. I think, my mom carries probably a lifelong amount of heartbreak that my brother and I did not get to meet either of her parents because they both died when she and her sister were pretty much coming of age and becoming, young women themselves. And so I know I got to meet my paternal grandfather, but not past the age of early childhood. And then my paternal grandmother lived to be 90. And for a brief moment, when my nephew was born, who was the first of that generation of cousins, we had 4 generations of the family of O'Connells together in one space to celebrate my grandmother's 90th birthday.
Wow. So, your great grandfather who stays in Europe, what happens with him?
Widely assumed, I think, within the family that he perished in the Holocaust. And so the rest of the family came over, the other brothers having the business, and a couple factories down here. I think there was a factory in Brewston, maybe one other city. But you can still see the building just off of the town square in Dixon, Tennessee.
So with those kind of stories, and I guess you, in effect, being a third generation down from the first American immigrant, generation immigrant family, and then your grandfather on the other side dying from government service. That's a lot of sort of political implications in your storyline. How do you, if at all, how do those stories, you think, resonate in your mind as you think about work in public service?
I think, so I guess a couple things, bringing it even and closer to where my parents were. My mom was a 40-year career teacher. She taught in both public and private schools. My dad was, for almost his entire career, a federal employee. He worked 2 different agencies within USDA for the initial part of his career, and then ended his career with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, primarily working as a ranger on lakefront property. And so I guess I got to see them both in kind of a civil service capacity, but it was interesting because I felt like I didn't really take government and economics, I was interested in other things in high school. So I was, I took some history, but I was trying to take advantage of all the things, including, basically as many AP courses I could fill my calendar with. Went off to college, and same thing. It was, hey, here I am knowing I'm going off to study computer science, which I'd had some exposure to in high school. And then kind of discovering that, hey, I might actually be able to get enough credits to get a music degree along the way. But it wasn't actually until my final year of college that I took a political science course. And it was interesting because it was a lot of, kind of the history. There was sort of a legendary professor who most of his students were taking the course as freshmen. And so I was kind of taking it at the end of my college career. But he was a really, really great professor, and, kind of go all the way back to, everything from Aristotle to Hobbes's Leviathan to more contemporary stuff. And it was a really good thing. But again, I think I was thinking of it more philosophically rather than connecting it in any way to, hey, my parents have done kind of civil servant type of work. And then it turns out, I guess, it would have been my great uncle Sam was actually, I think, at one point the mayor of Brewston.
Huh.
And so I believe there may be a statue of him out there somewhere. But this was, I mean, I didn't find this out until way, way later in my own adulthood. So I don't think, I think about it from the standpoint of maybe in a broader sense of how, I guess I would say I've probably come to the conclusion that everything is political, right?
Yeah.
There's the politics of the household, there's the politics of the office and the workplace, and certainly there is the direct politics of, living in a small d, small r democratic republic. But I wasn't really thinking about, hey, yes, the United States is a nation of immigrants, and therefore that informs my own interest in politics. It was, most of this journey was pretty accidental.
With one more question on your family. So with those varied lineages, what was the religious tapestry of your household and family like?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because even from an early age, I think my dad said explicitly at one point when my brother and I were kind of old enough to perceive of where things were from the standpoint of what, how religion played into not only our lives, but, I think the lives of the people around us, that he would have self-described as a lapsed Catholic. And he would talk about, they, for a time, their family lived in Florida, I think is where this happened. But, that at one point they were going to a church where most of the emphasis was not on, I'll just say, the Beatitudes, but more of a fire and brimstone approach to scaring you into sticking with the religion. And I think at one point he, I guess, got over his fear and maybe didn't find as much of the spiritual underpinnings there to keep him involved. But I will say, we maintained a fairly ordinary calendar of traditional Christian holidays. With my mom, she and her sister would still pretty regularly go to temple or synagogue on the high holy days. And we had an awareness of that. And then they would also often, my mom in particular, would come to our classrooms and tell the story of Judah Maccabee and kind of, some of the major stories of Judaism. And so we wound up also celebrating Hanukkah. And so I learned the Hanukkah blessing in Hebrew, but we really didn't go. It was almost like we got a lot of exposure to the parables, but they also weren't they weren't requiring me and my brother to go to church every Sunday or to go to temple every Saturday. And so I think we wound up with all of the things that were values-based, parable and philosophy-driven. But it wasn't in a, hey, we're doing religion together as a core part of how the family operated.
Yeah. Would there be one or two slogans, not the right word, but core commitments, principles out of that kind of Jewish lapsed Catholic heritage that bubbles up for you often, or is it just more in the background for you?
I think it's a really interesting thing because I think what it showcased for me is there is a lot of core agreement around values and some very deep disagreement about dogma. And I guess I do think it's very interesting because growing up, we knew, my mom and her sister in particular had grown up at a time when the Jewish community in Nashville and Middle Tennessee from Dixon was fundamentally smaller. And I think probably as a consequence of that, very tight knit. And so within that, even for us growing up, we knew a lot of people from a generation, most of whose members are not with us anymore. And you could find different levels of orthodoxy there. I think similarly, it took me a while to graduate because by the time I was paying attention to where my friends were and had a lot of friends who were Presbyterian and a smaller number who were Catholic, the idea of the closed table of communion was a really interesting one to come to later, just given where my dad's relationship with Catholicism was at that point and where his siblings had ranged. And so, we would go frequently have, as kids, big sort of family Christmases with his family, but it wasn't really, again, like the family, even in a broader Irish Catholic familial sense, was not bringing a lot of the doctrines of Catholicism in. And so, I think that's really it, is that I found a lot of the grounding in watching what my parents were doing to just kind of live their values, and how my brother and I kind of saw that from a role model standpoint, but not nearly the level of dogmatic approach to it that I've also seen a lot of my other friends and family engage in.
Yeah. So you go to Brown and 2 majors in computer science and music.
Yeah.
I'm drawn to that because I have a computer science undergraduate degree.
Okay.
And then went on to theology. But I love the science and humanities linked together. And so I want to ask you a question about that. So I remember reading years ago the famous management guru, Peter Drucker.
Yeah.
And Drucker has this provocative passage, I don't remember which book it was in, but it's a provocative passage, I thought, where he's really laying into the academic discipline of management, of which he's like the king, right? But but he was really laying into them for failing. He said that management discipline has failed, and it's failed because it's focused upon effectiveness without regard to ends. Effectiveness toward what end? And he said, and the reason this failure has occurred is because the management folks stopped paying attention to the liberal arts. And it's in the liberal arts, the humanities, music, philosophy, theology, history, literature, that people grapple with the question of what is life for and what is life about. And so if you don't ask that question, then your effectiveness could just be getting you in a much more rushed way towards no good end. And so that's a long way of asking the question, in what way do you think for yourself having a kind of a consummate discipline with regard to effectiveness in computer science combined with an interest in music, how has that double interest, you think, helped you in the kind of work you do in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. And I guess I'd reflect on a couple of things. I still remember, and you probably know this from studying computer science, right? So often, regardless of how you're getting started, at some level, the most basic program of all is the one that spits out the phrase "Hello World."
Yes.
Right. And so, it was always fascinating to me that you could find basically the simplest, most efficient programming language expression of "Hello World," and how at that moment that world was perfect in the in the space of that language, and whatever the compiler and interpreter and however your printout was coming out, like you had that, and then after that was chaos. Bugs get introduced. The more complex a system gets, if you're co-programming with somebody else, how you do all these things from tracking changes to whether you're introducing threadedness, and now to bring it into contemporary times, AI and machine learning and a bunch of things that were very much in the infancy then. And then I think I remember at some point fairly early in my career, after kind of watching Google get started and have this like really rigorous approach to kind of the most automated thing possible, and there was sort of a point of pride of, we're not going to have human-oriented interfaces, right? Like, you'll never actually interact with a real person when dealing with a Google-based system. Like, you'll submit a form or whatever, and then years later, they did this whole internal workforce study, and it revealed that the greatest skill of leadership and management from within Google was the people who turned out to have high degrees of empathy, And so here's this company that has really been at the forefront of
doing away with empathy.
like automating things, reducing the human component of something. And suddenly it turns out like when they actually do introspection, the thing that helped them advance the most from a corporate standpoint was the presence of empathy. And then I think about, I did a lot of visual art and enjoyed studying art history when I was in high school, and then get to music. And to get the music degree, you had to take a certain amount of the music history sequence, which was great. I loved that. But so much of that awareness of human history occurring with the context of the visual arts and music was a really fascinating way to kind of think about the sweep of human history as a whole, at least from the time of recording and the presence of the arts and music. And so I think about both of those things, but I also think about the Western expressions of music also have a lot of formulaic scenarios within them, right? The 1-4-5 chord progression, the idea of an organized set of possible notes, and the way they get characterized. I mean, it is in fact a specific language that has been codified for at least most of the Western canon of music.
Yeah. Do you? Well, let me back off that question. I'll come back to that later. When you came back to Nashville, you didn't have a car for 18 years, is that right?
No. It was about 3.5 years.
3.5 years, yeah. The great myth of no car for that long.
I mean, I guess you could argue the 18 years prior to that, I had no car as a person who was pre-driver's license.
Yes, So you came back to Nashville, didn't have a car for 3.5 years. And then, so you were riding the bus, walking, biking?
Yeah, I think it was probably about 2002. It's that thing about brothers and order of kids where somehow I think because my brother chose to go to the college that my parents met at but didn't like and left, which was Wash U. So we grow up hearing these stories of how much they didn't like St. Louis in the early 70s and wound up leaving. And where does my brother choose to go to college? Wash U. Well, obviously,
an odd sort of rebellion.
I suppose. But obviously, he's going to need a car for all 4 years. Whereas I go off to a school that they were just like they had a totally different take. Yeah. And so, anyway, long story of having a car in college. I think anyone who has a car that requires a certain amount of care and feeding comes to know what the car needs. And I had gone to a wedding in North Carolina and then flown back up to Brown to graduate. And there is still some dispute about whether my brother or father is actually responsible for this. But I knew how to prevent this old Toyota Tercel from overheating on the interstate, which it was prone to doing if you didn't offer it the appropriate level of care and feeding. It overheated repeatedly, apparently, on the way back to Nashville, and subsequently suffered a catastrophic engine failure. Now, I don't take a whole lot of personal responsibility for this, but my girlfriend had a Mercury Sable that when she left to go pursue her pre-medical credits en route to being a doctor, also suffered a catastrophic transmission failure as I was on my way to visit her driving the car. And so between those two things, I mean, maybe the universe was telling me that I was not supposed to have a car for some period of time. And it was interesting because I had already started to learn how to ride the bus. I had already encountered some people whose approach to the issue was not one of economic choice, but rather, disability or other approaches. And so it was really interesting to think about in those early years, even the difference between transit-dependent members of the community versus people who may be choice riders. And by and large, I would have put myself in the choice rider camp. But I mean, realistically, as a, fresh out of college guy whose first job suffered in the dot-com collapse, right? I was a part of the dot-com collapse. And so it wasn't like I could go out and pay cash for a new car. And so I figured, all right, I'm still paying off student loans. I'm trying to get out of debt, not add new debt. And so it turned out to be an important economic choice for me. And it turned out you could live. It wasn't easy. It certainly made my time management skills. It required some refinement there. I knew at one point exactly the sort of cubic feet of groceries I could fit in my backpack. It was an interesting exercise in all of those kinds of logistics. But it let me wind up debt free and then immediately go chase the better kind of debt of becoming a homeowner.
Yeah. I've had the opportunity in teaching, my teaching career, to spend semesters in major, significant international cities that all have excellent mass transportation: London, Santiago, Chile, Florence, Italy. And then for 5 years in graduate school days, I was in the Midwest. And in my Midwest days, I rode the bus or rode my bike or walked. Occasionally, I'd have access to the one car. My wife and I shared a car when we needed to use it. But then we moved back to Nashville after that, and I tried biking for, I think, maybe 6 months, maybe 9 months, maybe my first year. And I finally thought, I think I'm going to get killed. And I finally thought we're just going to have to get a car, because I couldn't afford the 2 hours it would take for me to go from, and it was only like a 2.5 mile commute from my home to my place of work, but it would have taken me about 2 hours to get there.
Yeah.
And so there is something very different, I think, about a community that is walkable and a community that has transportation. But why do you think for you that has become? Is it just because of your lived experience that became such a significant part of your concerns for Nashville?
I certainly lived experience is a part of it, but like you, I think like a lot of people who have ever spent any time away from the community that they grew up in and experienced something, maybe where there are more people living, but anybody who's ever gone to a bigger community than the one they grew up in, I think experiences something very similar to what you experienced, what I experienced too. So maybe these are two different types of lived experience. One was my lived experience growing up in Nashville and returning to Nashville and realizing how fundamentally inaccessible so much of the city was if you did not have a car. And then again, not having lived in, but having visited a bunch of other cities, not just in the United States, but also, again, with a mom as a foreign language teacher, having had the chance to go to Europe a few different times, and seeing how it works and experiencing it, you come to understand, oh, wait, you can actually untap a lot of economic potential, a lot of just access to city. You can think about entire places within a city a completely different way if you open up that access. And so it seemed, frankly, to be a place even 20 years ago where Nashville was lagging behind a lot of places, knowing that in almost every other dimension, this was a place that was a great place to live, that was continuing to attract people, has spent the past 25 years growing. Even during all of that, we were still kind of giving not enough attention, not enough resources to the overall problem of how people move around the city.
Yeah. I heard that you had went from no car to a car that you got on eBay, an old El Camino.
Yeah.
I looked it up. It's a really very ugly car.
I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder, Lee.
And it was a biodiesel.
It was a biodiesel El Camino.
Sticking true to your convictions there, at least.
This was going back to when Governor Bredesen at the time was, trying to create an alternative fuels corridor.
But I do confess a bit of envy when I realized that it was Daryl Hannah's car.
Right. So not only had, to me, the car itself did have a great deal of beauty to it, but yes, driven by a beauty as well.
Yeah. Has that allowed you to meet Daryl Hannah yet?
No, but it's funny. We've exchanged some amusing notes and had some, a friend of mine here actually met her not long after I bought it at an alt fuels conference.
That's hilarious.
And so, yeah, talked more to her mechanic actually for tips on starting it in cold weather.
So on No Small Endeavor, our tagline is exploring what it means to live a good life. And my field, academic discipline, is in ethics. And so obviously in the field of ethics, at least going back prior to the Enlightenment, you ask a lot of questions about what does flourishing human life entail? What does it look like to flourish as an individual? And what does it look like to flourish as a community? And so I think that what I would like to do here for a moment is to kind of set this frame of holding together this notion of individual flourishing that cannot be separated from communal flourishing.
Right.
And kind of ask some questions out of that framework. So first, let's imagine that you're talking to a free market fundamentalist, if you will. What would you want to say to a free market fundamentalist about what they might be missing?
They may fundamentally be missing that state capacity is all around us, right? It is hard to operate the marketplace without the sidewalks, the roads, the infrastructure, to some extent, the logistics that get you there. I think the other thing I always think about is the places that, I guess a few different ways I would look at this. One is the way in which being human itself, it's not as though we all start from zero in some kind of blind meritocratic system, right? You typically either have or don't have inheritance, debt, savings. Any of those things are already in place by birth. So we're starting. I don't know if you've in any of this done the kind of I can't remember what it's called, but maybe I think I've heard it described a few different ways. But the poverty walk, the poverty line, where everybody starts at the same place, and then you take a step forward based on some specific things about your upbringing, or take a step backward. And at the end of it, you've got a sense of how far apart so many people start their lives. And I think it is important to take that into account when you're thinking about fundamentalism and the free market. I think similarly, when you're born, there is no approach within the market and your behavior in it as a rational actor that determines when or whether or not you're going to get cancer, or a tree is going to fall on you, or you're going to get struck by lightning. There are massive uncertainties that, again, coming back to where I think state capacity performs at its best, if we want to thrive across the board, then there has to be an accounting for the fact that you may have things that befall you in your life that you had no control over, could not mitigate and risk, that far outpace your ability to have a financial response to them, whether it's a critical injury, a developmental disorder that's been with you, a diagnosis that happens to you at some point in your life. So the ability to account for those things at a social level is something that can be easily missed if you're an individual. Same thing with, I think about the difference of how agency evolves in life, right? If you are born in a situation where you win or lose the lottery based on your parents, you're born to one or two parents that can't care for you. They're unequipped to care for you effectively. That's a very different scenario than if you're born into a loving, financially stable household. And so the child didn't make that choice to be born in that condition. And I think a lot of scenarios related to that similarly get overlooked, and that has to be accounted for at the level of social thriving.
Yeah. So let's turn the perspective around and look at the other direction. From your the work that you're doing, what would you want to say or raise to consideration for maybe far left progressivism?
Yeah, and I think there you run the gamut of where what the fundamentalist position is. I mean, I think there becomes some question of how big do you want the social welfare state to be, and then there's a question of do you want to have public or private ownership of land, wealth, assets, all those kinds of things. I think I've always looked at it from the standpoint of I think there is fundamentally you're looking for the sweetest spot you can find on the curve between those two perspectives of I think there's a lot of value in the process of individual liberty and ensuring that you're maximizing the ability for people to make choices, pursue their goals, and do so either individually or in concert with others. And also there is a need for a sufficient amount of state capacity to address those things that would otherwise be very harmful to the idea of thriving together as a society. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'd say, I would not want to predetermine most of the outcomes I would have in my life. I wouldn't have wanted to take a test at age 18 and be told, you're going to be a farmer, you're going to be a factory worker, you're going to be a computer scientist even. I think it was great to be able to have access to enough education, some of it provided by the public process, that then let me go explore the world and engage in the world on my own terms. But I've done all of that also knowing that I've generally had sufficient agency, that I had, frankly, enough of a jump start there that I've been lucky enough to have had good health along the way.
Yeah. In the middle of all this framing, talk to us about poverty. How do you think about local Davidson County poverty? What nags at you? What do you wish could be addressed? Again, if you could kind of wave a magic wand, what would you wish could happen?
I mean, that comes back, I think, to the idea of what I think our overall platform is here in the mayor's office is trying to ensure that Nashville is at least as a city offering as much opportunity as possible for people to thrive, both individually and then also at that family level, at that community level, right? I think we have started to take steps to avoid creating new circumstances of concentrated poverty, which is really good, because we've seen time and time again that in scenarios of mixed income, you wind up creating more ladders of opportunity out of scenarios where you maybe your origin story is associated with poverty. We have to be very sensitive to and careful about, though, that we don't want our growth itself to be occurring in a way that you're only displacing poverty to some other area that's outside of Nashville. And there is some of that we are aware of. And so I keep a pretty close eye on our poverty rate, and our Metro Social Services Department has done a good job for years of doing this community needs evaluation process. And unfortunately, our poverty rate has been pretty stubbornly in the area above 10%, right? Rising up to the low to mid teens. And we want to put downward pressure on that poverty rate as much as we can. And I think ultimately what that means to me is we have to have enough learning opportunities for young people from pre-K all the way through however much high school people prefer to complete, that it does not seem as though the economy itself is existing in Nashville as something for other people, but rather, hey, Oracle announces that they're going to have their global headquarters here. Parents of someone who's in pre-K, when that job is announced, should have the confidence, oh yeah, not only might I have the opportunity to go get a job at Oracle that could improve our financial standing as a household, but also my child from a pre-K basis and then in through elementary, middle, high school could also then improve their opportunities. And then again, we have to, in all of that, take stock of where people's starting points are. We have some issues that affect poverty that are cyclical, chronic, and they can be everything from severe mental health issues, substance abuse issues. We have a pretty significant need to jump in and look at how anybody who's ever had an interaction with the criminal legal system, what that does to their opportunity. And we know we've had some research from Brookings that has shown exactly what that impact was starting in the 80s in the zip code that I've lived in for almost 20 years. And so have to take stock of all of those things and try to every day be bending those curves to enable more people to thrive.
What are major concerns for you as far as simply helping facilitate neighborhoods that make for human flourishing?
This is maybe the hardest problem of all in cities that are doing well enough that they can continue to attract new neighbors. For every person who has decided that Nashville is the right city for them to try to live in, especially if no one is leaving because the city is working for them too, that means you have to create a new home. And so I think one of the hardest parts is how neighborhoods discover together at the neighborhood level, at the community level, way before you get to the city level, do we want to welcome new neighbors or not, right? Not somebody moved out, there's a for sale sign, but rather there are probably 30 other people that would love to have the opportunity to live in my neighborhood. Am I okay with that? Right? 30 people that would need new space to live here. And can we find that together? And are we okay with that as a neighborhood?
Yeah. I mean, if I remember correctly, one of your slogans was, I want you to stay.
Yeah.
Right? So what does that mean or look like when there are as many people as there are wanting to come to Nashville?
I mean, in an ideal world, and I think Mayor Carl Dean, who was leading the city from 2007 to 2015, at the 15-year mark, reflecting on the successful Nashville for All of Us campaign that defeated English only, noted that the best compliment that anyone can pay a city is to choose to live there, right? And so to me, that means both current residents. I mean, I will say when I went off to Brown University, it was not actually my plan to come back to Nashville. And I think for my brother and for both of us really growing up here, it wasn't necessarily instinctive to think about staying in Nashville. It's been really interesting to see my two daughters talk extensively about how both of them hope to stay in Nashville. And I think some of that is we've done a much better job as a city providing opportunities for young people and activities for young people. And we always need to be working on awareness and access to those opportunities for young people at the greatest rates we can. But I think it also means that if you came here from somewhere else and you've decided to pay us that amazing compliment of wanting to live here, we want that to work out for you too, right? And so that means in a growing city, you're ultimately going to be adding homes for people that are choosing to live there. And so the city, at every moment, every day, the current residents of the city have to be making a choice together. Are we going to continue welcoming new residents here? And I think from my personal outlook is I love being part of a city that is continuing to persuade other people that this is a city worth choosing to live in.
What are your concerns in that regard with gentrification and the sense that others who have been around a long time either feel or realistically are pushed out of possibilities of neighborhoods they've been in a long time?
Yeah, I think you have to think pretty deeply about what it means to be pushed out. what is actually driving up costs, because I've seen my own neighbors on multiple occasions accept offers that when they bought their house, say 20, 30, 40 years ago, they could never have imagined that they would get a voluntary offer to sell their home for a price there. I would say it's not justifiable to deny them that opportunity. Meanwhile, I also have neighbors who will never accept an offer for any price. And then you also worry about your neighbors who may be on fixed incomes and are seeing some parts of their cost of living grow up. And so there are variations on all of those things that are different, either pressure points or opportunities, depending on how you look at it. And so whether someone concluded that they can't afford to live in the neighborhood or wanted to take advantage of a financial opportunity to leave the neighborhood, very likely in that case, you're going to see either one or more new scenarios happen there that may be driving up the cost or may be creating, a greater level of density. There could be a bunch of different ways that happens. And so I think there's a little bit of a question of what is gentrification? Is it just when you start to see turnover from a scenario where you had concentrated poverty? Is it when you see a neighborhood that had a mix of incomes become exclusively a higher income neighborhood? I think there are different ways to think about it and observe its effects in a city the size of Nashville. And I think ultimately, to me, a neighborhood stabilization scenario is one where nobody feels pushed out, but you may still see some evolution of housing types, housing density, housing price points. And we don't see a lot of organic, again, market-driven neighborhood stabilization. I'd come back to that overall point of where the market fundamentalism may be missing the mark on a few things is, yes, supply and demand certainly has an effect on the commodities of housing. But if you have zero income, you're not going to be producing an economic return for somebody else who may own land. And so the market, generally speaking, is not going to respond to the areas in a city that have poverty. And similarly, there's very little incentive for a consumer-based economy to try to create mixed income scenarios organically. So there tends to be a variety of forces putting pressure on how people live together at the neighborhood level.
Yeah. So in the time we have remaining, I'd like to turn to thinking about who you are and how you think about who you are and the way that then plays out in the work that you do. So I guess for this first question, we could kind of come at it from a couple of different angles. One would be, who would you see as substantive, crucial moral exemplars for you? And or what kind of moral commitments, principled commitments do you find yourself always wanting to go back to and remember that's the kind of person you're trying to be?
Yeah. I guess I'm very lucky because I've gotten to live and learn from, kind of live alongside and learn from a couple of people that I would put in that category. I got to spend several years sort of learning directly from Reverend Bill Barnes when he was on the Nashville MTA Board of Directors, and I was also on it. So Mayor Dean appointed me to that board back in 2008. And so I got to be working very closely with Bill on committee, and then also as a full board member, thinking through this really important intersection of where transit and housing come together, because he had done so much work on the issue of affordable housing, the issue of poverty reduction, the issue of kind of reentry when someone has come out of an incarcerated condition. And so absorbing all of that wisdom at a moral level and then trying to figure out how to make it operable as you are governing. I mean, my very first board meeting at Nashville MTA was one I'm very glad I never had to repeat after it happened, but it was in the midst of a fuel crisis. And so you had a full boardroom of a mix of generally disabled people who relied on paratransit and lower income people who may have been transit dependent at some economic level, encouraging the board to not either cut routes or raise fares, but in order to be able to maintain the budget for the entire system of transit in the city, that's inevitably what had to happen was both. And, watching Bill grapple with that decision as one that, again, at a complicated intersection of moral and fiscal, from a what you want to do versus what is possible standpoint, it was really important to go through that with him and kind of think through it with him, get his wisdom in that moment, and know that short-term sacrifice would be temporary and that you could move to something better later, which is exactly what happened. And thanks to Mayor Dean and a great board, we spent the next 7 years incrementally investing in transit and moving it to a new kind of plateau of service levels, streamlining some things, finding some efficiencies. And so working with Bill through that was really important. I'd say similarly, I got to know and become friends with and then eventually serve with Charlie Strobel on our homelessness planning council. And, now that Strobel House, our first public permanent supportive housing facility in the city, is open and basically full, it's really good that it has his name on it. I think that's very appropriate. But I think the way he approached the idea of humanizing everybody, no matter what their station or condition in life, remains a really important approach to understanding people well enough to meet their needs in some fundamental ways. And so, again, serving alongside Charlie in an imperfect ecosystem that already has a certain amount of, bureaucratic inertia, where you're dealing with the reality of existing in a fundamentally lower revenue environment than other places and still trying to care for people, that was a pretty informative scenario for me.
How you pointed to that tension between moral commitments and fiscal concerns. So let me abstract, speaking a bit more generally, how do you think about the necessity and or the danger of pragmatism generally?
I mean, the necessity is, every single day, again, from the public and private scenarios, you're navigating what it means to exist in a city and a society where you're looking at earning potential and wages and how you maintain a financial existence. And then you're also looking at, the system of fees and taxes that allow the public sector to operate at all. And so the question of what it ever means to fully fund something from a public standpoint is always dependent on whether you're going to have both public support for and public acceptance for whatever that network of taxes and fees and revenues you've got from a public system standpoint is. And fundamentally, it will never be enough to satisfy. I mean, that the tension inherent that I think produces pragmatism as a side effect is people want high quality services and low cost to provide them. And so those two notions are fundamentally incompatible.
We're out of time, so the last question to close us out with, One of the things that has so impressed me about stories I hear about you around Nashville is that you just show up and you're present in so many ways. And your kind of civil service that you've done for now many years, at some point you just started showing up and doing what needed to be done. And what's driven you to that, or what enkindled that in you, and or how might you encourage all of us to be that kind of neighbor?
I mean, I guess, again, I'd say I backed into all of this in some ways by being car free for a number of years. And then, that turning me into a homeowner in a neighborhood context where, separate and apart from those experiences working with Charlie and Bill, there was a network of neighborhood leaders that first my own neighbors kind of inviting me to take on a leadership role, and then other leaders in neighborhoods around mine inviting me to join them and do, so there's a little bit of just kind of, naively saying yes to more free work at multiple different opportunities. But I'll say too, I think it is natural and appropriate to reflect on the fact that we, at a neighborhood level, you have chosen to be in a neighborhood for a reason that probably has some appeal. There may be other reasons, but if you have made a choice to live somewhere, you've chosen that for a reason. My hope is that most Nashvillians, most days, have chosen to live in Nashville because the city offers them something. And I think it's great to lean into that, like every day, especially on a day like today when the weather is beautiful and we have a park out here on Public Square. I hope there are people enjoying themselves in that park. This past weekend was the Cherry Blossom Festival. It was also Record Store Day. There was also, a Nashville SC game. There was Crafty Bastards going on, the East Nashville Beer Festival. Not all of those things have to be for everybody, but it is awesome to have a city so full of life that there can be something for everybody. And so I love being in a place where I can lead a city I love. And so meanwhile, before I was in any kind of leadership role, just generally participating in community with a city that I love and people that I like, respect, admire, and often also love. And so I do think there's something that happened as a consequence of COVID that pushed maybe too many of us into an isolated condition for too long. And even a couple years after, it seemed to be, recovering as a city, as a society broader than Nashville. I would still hear from a surprising number of my friends some variation of I've forgotten how to interact with people. And I do think there's a lot of value in staying in life in the real world and avoiding abstracting it away, whether it's through, video games or social media. I mean, it's good to be in the city. And so I think there are so many ways to experience community here that range from our network of schools, parks, and libraries, but also just places where you can interact safely and have fun with other people. And I would definitely encourage people to do that basic thing as often as they can.
Been talking to Freddie O'Connell, 10th Mayor of Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for your service to the world.
Lee, great to be with you. And thanks for offering this awesome forum for conversation.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriette Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.